half an hour, we're going to be talking about data and data and sport. I have two extremely experienced practitioners of data, and from very different perspectives. One is from the club perspective, in the La Liga, and then there's from an agency and consulting perspective. But maybe I can just start off. Ben, do you want to sort of give us a bit of a background about yourself? You know, what 21st Century Group does, and and then we can go from there.
Sure. Hello everyone. So Ben Marlow, I'm Chief Strategy Officer at 21st Group. So my background is as a advisor in the sports industry for many years. We've used data science, data analytics to provide either advisory or content services to a range of different clients across the industry, generally with a view to trying to kind of grow commercial value. Our focus has always been looking at performance and how you can harness performance in some context to grow that commercial value. So what happens on the pitch as a big driver of what happens off it from a revenue perspective. And yeah, very pleased to be here.
Excellent. Elias, thank you for coming. Want to share a bit about yourself and your role and the organization?
I am Elias Zamora, from Chief Data Officer of Sevilla FC, and as head of the data department of Sevilla FC, our role is to care about data and analytics in Sevilla FC, as well as Ben for the external organization, but internally, and to be aligned fully with the business and sport goals of the organization. So to use data to help the other part of the organization to do better their jobs.
Okay, that's great. I think what jumped out to me really was, you advise Ben, and a lot of what you're doing is align. I think those are the two important sort of verbs which come out. Let's start at first principles. Let's define data, because it can mean many things to many people. Maybe you can kick us off. How do you define data, and how do you look at the different types of its applications? What are the 2 or 3 buckets you keep in mind? And crucially, you want your colleagues to keep in mind when they think about and talk about data.
Yeah. This is a very important question, because data typically sounds like something esoteric or very sophisticated, but it is not. Data, or what I love to say, datification, is, we can see it as a technological revolution. A technological revolution based on the synergy of information, mathematics, what people call now computer science, is nothing, artificial intelligence is nothing more than mathematics.
Yeah.
And computational power, that is what really made the difference in the last tens of years. What given impact to change the productivity of organization, to change the whole economy in a country level and the whole productivity in organization level. So this defines very well what is data. Data is what the information and the transformation of the information that help you to make better your job. Your job can be in a football club to play better football, to have better players, to make more money through ticketing, to make more money through fans engagement, to make more money through sponsorization, to make people happier in one way or the other. Everything is done through information, and everything is done through the transformation of such information through mathematics and computation.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So what I'm taking away here is productivity.
Productivity is key.
Yeah, and what I'm taking from here is that productivity in recent years has been enabled because computational power has gone up. So technology is enabling the uses of data at a pace and a scale and a degree of sophistication, which is the new frontier. Okay,
Exactly.
Ben, what's your take?
Yeah, so I think for us, we look at it from 2 different contexts. So one is in the advisory world, you're generally looking to support a decision. So you lead with the decision first, and then what data enables you to do is be better informed in how you make that decision, providing that you can harness it in the right way and understand, what data that you have and how it fits into that decision-making process. On the other side of our business, we also do content. So in that context, data is really about storytelling and narratives and what you can use from the data to tell a different story that a fan might engage with, that gives them something different about their engagement with that particular sporting property or product. So you're trying to grow the level of interest, passion, connection, whatever you want to call it, with the sport that they're following. So it depends on the application of data. The application of that data depends on the objectives you're trying to achieve. So if it's making a decision and being informed, or whether it's telling a story, we sort of harness it in that way. And on the decision-making context, I think this leads very much into what Elias was talking about. It's ultimately about predictions. If you're trying to make a decision on something, you're trying to choose the best course of action when faced with a series of choices to achieve an objective. And what you're trying to do there is say, well, I think this outcome will be better if I choose A versus this one if I choose B. And with the computational power that now exists with machine learning and AI and the volume of data that's now collected, a lot of that kind of predictive element can be done more effectively through using data to do that, rather than using kind of entirely intuition. And our view, for what it's worth, is that there's always a room for both, but that kind of predictive element in the decision-making context is really important.
Let's come back on the predictive element and the optimization of decision making, which you're talking about. But just want to sort of flesh out a bit more. So we've worked out broadly what data means in terms of productivity or advisory or computation. When we were talking before the panel last week, we were talking about broadly 3 applications of data: on pitch and off pitch broadly, and then within the off pitch there's the B2C or D2C, direct to the consumer, and then the B2B, which is the sponsorships and the broadcast organization, that kind of stuff. Could you give us an example of 1 or 2 which highlights how crucial data has been either in deciding what to do or delivering what to do? Maybe I can start with you, Elias.
This is one of the key elements of football industry. What we are doing here today is something that shows how different football is, with how many different approaches, how many different people, how many different services, and it is because a football team or a football industry is extremely complex. Complex in the sense that the first and the most important maybe is that this is a game played with a ball. And this makes, so you have to, first of all, to understand the game and to provide information that makes your probability of winning such a game higher. What are the key 2 elements that are changing now with data in this direction mainly? First of all, the direction of scouting. So to choose players, which are the best players that I can choose with my resources, with the money that I have. Because if not, you choose Messi, Mbappe, Cristiano Ronaldo, whatever, and they play well. But if I don't have a huge amount of money, who is the best player according of my style of game, according to the characteristics that I need from this guy, according to whatever goals I have? This data offers you a huge amount of description of the player that allows you to take the best decision. The second, in the pitch, close to the pitch, is, okay, now I have already my players. How should these guys play? How I can analyze the game to allow my team to play better? I cannot change now the players, but I can change the way that they play as a collective. This is the analytical part of the data that is now being under a revolution through the tracking data. So now I know where is and what is doing every player in every frame, in every position of the space. And this allows you all the playground to decide how your team plays. From the point of view of the B2B in a football club is mainly sponsoring. For a club like Sevilla FC, one of our main revenue sources is who is in our t-shirt, who is together with us in our digital asset, who wants to be linked to us in order to share our values. And this, you have to identify who are the companies out there, who are the institutions out there that you want to be with you and they want to be also with you. So a kind of a scouting of companies is fundamental through data. You have through data to understand in which market you are. It's not the same as Spain or Saudi Arabia. You have through data to understand who are the companies that match to the momentum of such a market. You have through data to understand who are the persons in such a company that you have to contact with. this is a typical example of a B2B in football. And a B2C, the B2C is the more or less the initial one. So who is going to go to my stadium? How I can feel better my stadium, because there are pool of people. You are selling something individually, and I am selling also t-shirt. How I can sell better t-shirt? How I can analyze all the data of consumption of retail in order to offer more individualized and better policies in order to increase your revenue. So this shows how different is football, and with how many different perspectives you can use data in order to answer the key questions of football.
That was beautiful. So I think you've taken what I was saying to the next level. To my mind, to summarize, on pitch is two things: identification and then optimization for performance. And then the off pitch is about the B2B sponsorship and the consumer piece as well. Ben, what's the lens you bring, and how is what Elias has said similar or different to the kind of conversations you have with clients?
Yeah, I think it's probably a very comprehensive answer, but I can perhaps add some more context to some specific examples that we use it in. So on the performance side, to think around the benefits a club gets from using data. So Elias spoke comprehensively around, I guess, the merits of it in general. But if you're a club, often you will have a whole world of players that you could recruit from, or markets from which you could recruit. Football's the most global sport in the world. And therefore, being able to access that whole of market is very difficult. If you're a club with limited resources, even some of the best clubs in the Premier League will have 10 scouts. It's impossible for them to be fully informed about every single market globally. So how do they therefore make the choice around where to allocate those resources without necessarily missing out on other opportunities for finding value in those markets? So data gives you that. It gives you access to the ability to understand which markets are good, where players may be able to make that transfer, etc. So it gives you that kind of access point. The other element to it is, again, the prediction point. So football being global, one of the biggest challenges as it relates to predicting whether players are going to do well in your club relative to another is understanding how well talent translates from one league to another. So if you've got a player who scored 20 goals in the Eredivisie, how many goals are they going to score if they move to the Saudi Pro League? How many goals are they going to score if they move to the Premier League, with all those contextual factors that are added in? And data can give you that view, given all the data points of players that have moved from one market to another, machine learn properly so that you get it sort of done robustly through the computational power of analytics these days. It can give you a much firmer grounding on which to say, I think this player will translate this well from this league to another. Another very tangible example is head coaches. So
is what, sorry?
Head coach hire.
Yep.
So at 2 different points. So number one is when you sack a head coach. So that happens very often, as we know in football. Average tenure head coaches generally is around a year, a little bit less than that in a lot of markets. And what you tend to see is that head coaches get sacked after a bad run of form. We can be very short-termist in football, as we know. A lot of pressure when you're working with a club, a lot of media pressure and scrutiny, and it's the only lever you can pull if you're outside a transfer window to show that you're trying to do something to change performance. So people often sack a head coach because they've had a bad run of games. And one of the metrics that's come out from, I guess, the data revolution, if we can call it that, in football is something called expected goals, which says, let's accept that finishing is quite random. And a great example of that is Lionel Messi, who's probably the best exponent of kicking a football ever lived. His conversion rate of penalties is about 70%. So he scores 70% of his penalties, which is bang on average for every player in the world. So finishing, shooting, putting the ball in the net is pretty random, but creating chances is more indicative of future performance. So expected goals says, what should the score have been on an average day given the chances that were created and conceded? And if you look at that metric, often coaches get sacked when goals go down, but expected goals stay level. So basically they've just been a bit unlucky. And then this new manager bounce, there is a bit of new manager bounce because you get new impetus, new people trying to impress, etc. But often it's a regression to the mean of expected goals catching up with real goals. So you do get moments where clubs will not sack a coach because they've looked at the expected goals and say, actually, we're being a bit unlucky here. So it can sort of help you avoid the noise. And that's something that in football is so important because it's such an echo chamber. There's so much interest in it. There's so much noise around. If you're a decision maker in that context, having something that can give you some grounding is super important.
what are your thoughts, Elias, on what Bennett just said? Obviously, do you see any similarities to your day-to-day life as chief data officer of a Premier League club?
I consider what Ben said is extremely important and also extremely difficult to implement because football, as well as finance, is an irrational, irrational game in which the stakeholders are also irrational. But well, I have one. I am lucky, better to say, because as a chief data officer of an organization like Sevilla FC, we are the one that collect data and provide information, but we are not the one that are taking the business decisions through this information.
Okay.
So this is important because what Ben said is more than introducing a protocols and a culture that are data driven in the organization.
Great point. Yeah.
So I consider it's very important, but it is this is a so important topic that must be completely up down and across the organization, and not only around the data department, but de facto around every department, being the data department the one that are in one way or the other helping the other to transform.
That almost seems to me. I mean, I've worked in broadcasters, like ESPN or federations like the ICC, or we have gaming clients. It almost seems to me that you're almost looking at the role of the chief data officer similar to, and I may be wrong, but please tell me if I am and why I am, the same role or similar role as a chief financial officer, where you are in charge of the money flows, but not the decisions, the business decisions on the money. And until you actually tell the businesses that is cash flow, or you have sensitivity on pricing, whatever the case might be, the decision eventually actually happens within marketing or sales, or as the case might be. To what extent is the parallel I'm drawing? Because what I'm trying to do here is get the audience thinking about what is the nature of a chief data officer role, because you made a very important distinction. You are not the one making the decision. You are the one enabling the decisions to be made. I think it's a very important distinction. To what extent do you think that the CDO role and the CFO role are similar or different?
This is a critical question. Is the CDO a technological guy?
Yeah.
Or is the CDO a business guy with technological and mathematical knowledge? This is the question. From my point of view, this should be always the second. Because the chief data officer, first of all, and the most important, should understand the business in order to know and to prioritize which is the problems that he must attack. He must attack through technology, and he must attack through science. And because of that, finally, there is a combination of when you go to the, to the chief marketing officer, you go to the sport director, you go to the legal director, and you offer them, I saw that you have here problems. I know that with data, I can help you here, here, and here. Other times, it's the chief financial officer that happened to me, or the other colleagues that come to me and say, I have a problem, this is the problem, help me. So you should be intelligent enough, you should be business-oriented enough as a chief data officer to be able to understand the business. And then what makes you special is that you can convert the business problem into a mathematical problem, and this mathematical problem to be solved with computers.
And you got to then when the answer comes out, you got to be able to communicate that in Spanish or English and not maths.
Exactly.
So it's both ways, right?
You have to close the cycle, right?
I see you smiling, Ben.
Yeah, there's a few things that resonate there. So firstly, data doesn't tell you anything unless you ask the right questions of it. So your point about understanding the business or what decisions you need to make, it is absolutely fundamental to the first step of what you're going to ask of the data. So it's kind of a top-down approach rather than a bottom-up. You would never go, got all this data, let's fiddle around with it and see what it can tell me, because you don't know what's going to come out, or you don't know if what comes out is going to be relevant. So you sort of have to say, right, what am I shooting for? What's the business about? What are my objectives? I need something to inform my decisions around that. Data is going to be a big part of that. Let's ask some specific questions that help me do it. And I think the other point Elias made, which is spot on, is just culture and how difficult that is in industries, and actually any organization. Change is hard, moving from one to the other. I mean, one film that always gets talked about in this context is Moneyball, and people look at that and say it's a film about using data to make decisions in baseball. I actually look at it and think it's a film about organizational change, and how do you fundamentally shift how an organization used to operate to how we want it to operate going forward, and how challenging that is. And I think that's certainly true of football, and actually sport more generally, partly because it's still evolving as a sort of professional, entity, I guess. Like, it's only a handful of years relative to other industries where sport has been a proper professional endeavor, and the governance of it, from a club level to a league level to everything else, is relatively immature by the same measure that you might measure finance or something else. So I think there's a lot that resonates there around A, what questions you ask of it, and B, how you can change that culture. I mean, I think it's very telling that Premier League is a great example. We've done a lot of work in the Premier League. We're headquartered in London, richest league in the world. Every club has access to data. Every club has access to Stats Perform or Stats Bomb or whatever. But there are only two clubs. City are very good at it as well, actually, but there are only two clubs that really have a reputation for nailing it.
Cuando era chico, se la pasaba viendo películas.
It's relevant that the owners of those two clubs run betting companies who make their money. And they have top to bottom say, we know there's a market, that there's an edge in this, using this information properly. We own these organisations, so we're going to set the tone, and the difference is marked. I mean, Brentford, when they're in the Championship, their revenue was 12 million. Every year they doubled it through player sales. The only club in certainly England that were able to do that consistently.
And here I was thinking that they just did what they did because they're a client of yours. But obviously that's probably part of the solution as well. But it does make me smile, though, when people talk about sport as an industry. I just want to sort of come back to that. I'm just wondering, in terms of the audience, if anybody has any comments or questions, just raise your hand and shout, I guess. But if you don't, we will carry on. We have another 10, 15 minutes. When Kabir set us up for this conversation, I almost thought about one of my roles about a decade ago was to be chief digital officer of a business, about 15 years ago. And I came from the sports industry, and it was more in the media industry. People didn't quite understand what is it that I was supposed to do, and how they could get value from interacting with me. And my Monday morning meetings with the boss, alongside the other people reporting to the boss, were quite tricky. Talk us through your first 100 days. I'm assuming you joined the organization as the chief data officer from day one. Where did you come from? What was the experience like? How did your behavior and people's response to that behavior on a Monday morning meeting, how did that evolve to Ben's point about culture?
This is interesting in my case because I am a scientist. I made physics and maths. Then I moved to mathematical models in biology.
Wow.
Then I was 9 years doing asset management in Germany, so investing in the stock market and trying not to lose a lot of money, at least, through algorithms. And in a given moment, but due to luck and due to some coincidences, we start analyzing data in my company in Germany for football, mainly social media. I was in contact with Sevilla. I was already the board of my previous company, and finally we start doing together a scouting platform, internal with internal KPIs, with internal business inside. So I was 2 years working from abroad, but very close to Sevilla FC. Mm-hmm. And in the sport department, that is the most difficult to enter. When you enter there, you are very well accepted in the organization because you went to the core of the organization and they accepted you. So from the cultural point of view, you were in the good direction. Plus, also, I was heavily supported by the management, by the CEO mainly. Yeah. Then, 2 years later, in 2021, I entered in the company as a chief data officer, and I grounded the data department of Sevilla FC. That is now the biggest in the Spanish La Liga. And how is the interaction with the other departments? I give an example that was probably the best example that I can give, and happened the first day in which I was working in Sevilla FC. I was there, I gave a 10-minute speech in front of everybody, a presentation, was COVID, so it was everything remote. And one day, and the next day, or even this day, the chief financial officer came to me and he told me, I have a problem. This is the problem. The problem is the identification of players that were playing with Sevilla FC under 23. And then if they move to other club and make money in other club through transfers, I have to identify it in order to get my part in this transfer money.
Yeah.
And he came to me and told me this. And I was thinking, I said, this is a problem that can be solved. And together with my team, in the free time, because we had other projects, we started working in such a project. And then finally, we end up with a platform called AI Tracking that solves internally this problem. So the question is to speak a lot with people, not just with your boss, because your boss you have just to feel that everything is going properly, but your colleagues you have to be so empathic that the colleague has to go to you and tell you, Elias, I have a problem, help me.
Yeah.
I need the next project. And then this project was so successful that Javier Cano, that is the chief financial officer, allowed us to do this project. And this project was then commercialized with La Liga Tech, for the first time in the history of Spanish football. So because of that, you could, from an internal problem that was already detected by the chief of the department, you could solve it and then sell it to third parties to be used by third clubs. And now there are clubs in America, Europe, Spain, etc. I hope that Asia, that already consume such technology that was generated in a random conversation in the first day.
So so I think you're saying two things. One, the empathy to build a relationship so people can approach you, be vulnerable about I have a problem and I can't find a solution, you find it for me. So I think dynamically at a C-suite level, it's a very tricky piece.
They are key. They are very talented professionals in finance, in marketing, etc. But they don't have the mathematical or the technical abilities in order to solve it, and they know it.
Yeah.
They know the limitations that they have. All of us, we have limitations.
Yeah.
And it is very important to know your limitations and to know that maybe your limitations are the strong points of the colleagues that you have here.
Ben, talk me through about a client being empathetic and a client actually being aware and explicit about a weakness or a limitation, as Elias said. Talk us through how do you talk to clients to be able to identify an issue, define a problem statement, construct and design an engagement? What is that conversation like? Do you always work with one functional head, or what is your touch point in the organization? And how does that vary or stay similar?
Yeah, no, we do it in lots of different ways, but ultimately there's a big sort of listening brief as an advisor around, you know, what are you trying to achieve and what's stopping you from achieving it today, and if there a gap exists, that's something that we can help with, then we will do that. I think what Elias said was really interesting about his own background. So you describe yourself as a scientist. I think we recognise that hugely, because in sport, there's a big spectrum upon which people view the term sort of analyst or analysis. And at one end of the spectrum, you have, you know, an ability to sort of, in the performance context, watch a game and come up with some insights or inform the coach around strategy or tactics or whatever. In the business context, maybe look through, I don't know, sales figures in Excel and come out with some insights, etc. That is sort of one end of the spectrum. At the other end, you have AI, machine learning, a technological solution for driving insight or meaning from data. And a lot of the time we try and establish the extent to which there's a need for a more kind of scientific approach to it. I mean, we've got a team of 12 data scientists. When I say data scientists, it's engineers, it's you know, people operating at that very technical end of the spectrum. So is the problem something that you have the capability internally to solve? Number one. If it's not, is it something that we can solve? Number two. And how would you like us to solve it? Is it as a advisor where we work together for the long term and you sort of outsource these types of things to us? Or is it something that actually you'd like to do yourself in time? You just don't have the capability yet. So we do something called data transformation, which is around building the technology, advising them on the capability they need internally to enable them to sort of terrible consulting phrase, but kind of reverse integrate the TFG technology into their own business. And, and all of those things are kind of on the table when you start those discussions, but it's really around trying to find out what the issue is before practically pushing something that, you know, they may not want.
Okay. We've been given the 5-minute sign, and that was about a minute ago. So you have 2 minutes each. My last question to you. What is the piece of advice you would give to yourself from 3 years ago? Let's circle back to pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. What's the biggest learning you've had in the leadership you've provided in the role that you're in? You know, if you were to go back and start over again, what one thing might you do differently, or what one thing might you do more of because it worked?
I'd have invested in Zoom 4 years ago, probably.
Sorry, say again?
I'd have invested in Zoom 4 years ago if it's pre-pandemic.
I'm in the context of your role in remit.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Very good question. I think the pandemic's been really interesting so we found there are two big drivers of, I guess, outcomes post-pandemic. One has been a real focus on strategy, because I think it was a big jolt to the system that made people think very differently about, well, first it created the space to think about kind of longer term things, and secondly, I think it gave a bit more of a sort of push factor to do that. And the other reason it's been interesting for us is in the content side of our business, where we create inventory to activate sponsorship. So we're creating new revenue generative assets. So it's kind of incremental revenue. There's been more appetite to do that because, I guess the appetite for growth and nervousness about traditional revenue streams has been more acute. So I think being more proactive about, I guess, thinking further ahead with our clients and getting our clients to think more long term, and almost the sort of what if scenarios. I think sport, because you got to win every weekend and there's all this short term pressure, you can be a bit transactional about things.
Okay.
And I think the pandemic has helped create a little bit more longevity in the time frames that people are thinking about problems now, and robustness of organizational design and commercial models and things like that. So I think trying to, and it's also the right thing to do, right? So it's sort of a positive outcome. I think maybe owning that a little bit more proactively would have been.
So I guess proactively, but also being prescriptive, perhaps, and taking them along the journey. Elias, the last word.
I think that, at least in my organization and myself, pandemic didn't change a lot, because we were very lucky. We had a strategical data plan in 2019 already. But the thing that I saw that pandemic change is the acceptance of digital changes in organizations. So people got used to work from home. People got used to see that what they are doing is less physical and more digital. And this made the change dramatical in the out of the pitch business lines of the organization. Yeah. Because the pitch was already pretty much with data, with technology, with different platforms, more or less all the ones that are now, they were already 5 years ago. But all the push of data in the organization in different a priori more analogical areas has changed a lot in the organization, or at least the acceptance and the pace of change after pandemic. And what I would do is the same that what I wanted to do, but now I think that it's even more important. It's fundamental that the flags of information goes from down. So the culture has to go from up down, and the flags of information have to go from down up. And this is fundamental, because finally, the one that they have to take the biggest and most important and crucial decisions, they must have a completely reliable and deep enough dashboard in order that be sure enough that they are not ignoring key part of the business.
Great. Gentlemen, look, I think the last decade was the decade of digital. This decade is very clearly the decade of data. I wish you both well. You are painting on a very, very large canvas. But I think on behalf of the industry, I think we need more people like you. Thank you very much for your contribution. If I can ask the audience to please put your hands together and thank these two gentlemen, I'd appreciate that.